Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? Let's talk about comics. I was looking at my bookshelf tonight, and I was thinking, for a guy who mentions on YouTube as often as I do that I'm new to comics, I sure do own a lot of comics, and I've been reading comics for a long time. I wondered why I felt that way. I was able to narrow it down to two things. One of them being that I still am fairly new to the local comic book store experience. I've only had a pull file for about 18 months by now, and climate protester got him. And for the most part, I don't read ongoing Marvel and DC titles. I'm reading the DC Absolute Trinity right now. Other than that, my familiarity with those two studios and their IPs is through cultural osmosis and through being a 90s kid watching the cartoons. There was Batman the Animated Series, there was the 90s X-Men, and then the Amazing Spider-Man run. There was that slightly less popular animated Superman show that didn't win as many awards as the Batman one, but it was animated in the same style. And so I was familiar through all of that. And then, of course, the 2000s hit, all the live-action shows and movies popped up because, hey, the budgets could keep up with the production values and so on and so forth. And you could be forgiven for thinking that you're not into comics if you don't read Marvel and DC, just because those are the two biggest entities in comics. And if you don't know a lot of the details and minutiae of Batman lore and Superman lore and Spider-Man lore and all that stuff, then, if you don't know the fundamentals, how do you know comics? But as I'm looking at this collection that I've got, I think I do know comics. I'm kind of out in the weeds. I think it's fair to say that the funnies, the old Sunday comic strips and stuff, those are a different medium. They're still illustrations and there's still a format to it and all that, but reading those is not the same as reading comics. Floppies, monthlies, trade paperbacks and stuff. It's a different method of telling a different type of story, even if it is words and pictures on paper. Nevertheless, the Sunday funnies were kind of my gateway drug to wanting to read slightly more elaborate and complicated comic books. And that eventually got me into, at some point in my teens, reading a book here and there. And then in my 20s, I started buying the odd trade paperback. Now, most of what I got initially was Transformers comics, back when Transformers was licensed by IDW. I don't know a whole lot of the industry stuff, which company was started when and which one was up to dastardly practices and who hires what scumbag and whatever. Generally, what I've heard in the whispers and stuff online is that IDW mishandled something somewhere along the way. They had a long Transformers run. The rights reverted back to Hasbro. Now they're with Skybound, which is an imprint of Image, and blah, blah, blah. There's probably value in knowing all of that stuff, but I don't want to feel like I've got to know all of that to know what I'm reading if I'm just in the mood to read a good Transformers book. I've read a couple of IDW titles in my early to mid-20s. That was most of the comics that I bought at that time. But I was still reading comic strips, only at this point I was reading web cartoons. I read Schlock Mercenary. Geez, I haven't checked in on that one for a long time, but I remember that the creator of that one recommended I look into Skull Kickers by Jim Zubkovich, which I think had been released in the issue-by-issue format at that point, and they were now being released in trade paperback. So I started buying those on Amazon every couple of months or maybe once a year. Skull Kickers was freaking hilarious. I'm going to do a whole video on the Skull Kickers run. That introduced me to Jim Zubkovich's work, and he's well known in the industry. He's written for a bunch of different publishers, and I think he teaches animation up in Canada, animation or illustration, one of the two. But reading his Skull Kickers got me into his next project in the mid-2010s, which was called Wayward. And I just realized last night, I never actually finished Wayward. I believe there are 6 volumes to it. I read the first 3 back when Comixology was a thing. And then Comixology, I think they got bought by Amazon and their format changed, and my reading of that series kind of lapsed. and then I just never finished it. And I look back at it just tonight, and it's like, oh, that's actually done now. I can go get it. I haven't logged into Comixology in years, but from what I understand, and I think your boy Zach talked about this, Amazon bought it and integrated it into their system and like intentionally destroyed it. I cannot explain to you why. Amazon, Google, like these big tech companies will buy smaller platforms that operate in a space they want to get into and then kill it. And I don't get what the appeal of that is. Amazon wanted an audiobook platform. Instead of building one, they just bought Audible. And then apparently they wanted a comic book platform, and instead of building one, they bought Comixology, stripped it for parts, integrated it with Kindle, and then somewhere along the line erased a bunch of titles. While I do have a pull file at my LCS, I did also have a digital pull file on Comixology, and I completely forgot about this. I was only reading a couple of ongoing titles back when they were probably $2 or $3 an issue, but one of them was Wayward by Jim Zub. I think there was another one, it was Mockingbird, back when that one got announced, which that was one of the first casualties of the late 2010s era of let's start writing really bad feminist comics and they'll sell so poorly that they'll crash before the volume is even finished. And I read probably the first 2 issues of Mockingbird, and I thought, okay, this is initially going somewhere, and then I heard that it got canceled, and I was like, oh, man, I was following that one. What was going on? Well, the 3rd issue dropped, and it was like basically the writer beating the audience over the head for not being feminist. It's like, oh, geez, I can't imagine. That was right around the time that your boy Zach kicked his channel off and started just pointing things out in comics saying, what the hell are you doing? You're hurting comics by doing this. And the big names in comics started pushing back saying, you're a sexist. It's like, you haven't actually refuted any of my points, though. And then the independent pushback came and Comicsgate came, and now comics became this cultural tug-of-war rope, and here we are. My familiarity at that time still had to do with DC and Marvel, still had to do with the movies at this point. I wasn't really watching the shows, but I was still like continuing to read comic books. In the mid-2000s, I got James Owen's Star Child graphic novels, and I bought his Essential Star Child off of that Kickstarter. It's another one that I need to do a deep dive summary video on. That is a really complex series, and James has a way of not explaining things that you might want to understand as the story goes, but it's such a compelling read, and the artwork is so beautiful that it's like you keep going because you want to know how it all ends. Star Child is a complex book. But then I started reading Atomic Robo in 2017, 2018 or so. And that's another one that was released in the issue-by-issue format. I started buying the trade paperbacks because at that point I didn't really own issues of comics. I think I had Smallville #1, and that was it. So, yeah, I've been at this for a while. I think I own 6 or 7 Atomic Robo paperbacks, and then I started checking out the rest from the library. And at that point, late 2010s, early 2020s, that series was already a couple of years old, and so I was behind the curve. And then I remember reading one of them that was pretty good, and then I got to the very end, and I was like, oh, this must have come out like right after Trump got inaugurated, because the author had some scathing screed about, oh, I don't know if I'll be allowed to write these comics anymore because the fascism is taking over. And it's like, what the hell is this? Like, why are we doing this? I don't want to read your book anymore. This is dumb. And at that point, like the series had been kind of tapering off and changing its tone, and it started out with really, really strong, like A, imagination, and B, comedy chops. And then there started to be like entire volumes that were just like dramatic and emotional and sad. I was like, oh, this isn't as fun as it was, and the story isn't really going so many places. And then like 2 or 3 issues into that particular spell of the series, then the author's like, Trump fascism. I was like, can we not? Please, can we not? But that's kind of indicative of that whole era of the people who had largely become like the biggest voices in comics suddenly saying like, if you can't be a comics fan if you like this and vote this way. Don't do this. Don't do this. And now, as a couple of comics YouTubers have documented, the pendulum is swinging the other way, and the other extreme is saying we're going to take over comics unless you agree with this, 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 and this. It's like, no, I want to keep reading good comics. I don't want to put up with all this other stupid crap on the side. So I've still been reading stuff that I enjoy. I've been finding a lot of stuff. It seems like it's all mainly through Image, and apparently people have opinions of Image as a publisher. Like, I almost don't want to know. I don't care, because all I know is that I read a lot of books that I really, really enjoy. They all come out from Image. I don't want to know what the high school girl clicky catfight stuff is behind the scenes, because these are the guys that are producing great books that I want to read. I need to go back and reread the first couple of Wayward paperbacks. I need to then read the rest of that series. I'm due to reread Skull Kickers. Maybe I will try to pick up Atomic Robo and finish that one, see where it's gone, because there were a couple of, threads that were teased in like volume 3, 4, 5, and I'd like to see if Clevenger ended up finishing those. I don't know, like, goes back to the Abed quote. I just like liking things, and I've been into comics for more than I realized. I just haven't been into DC and Marvel so much, and I'm still new to the go to the comic book store every Wednesday and pick up my floppies scene. But I like it, and I want to keep liking it. I'm not sure what kind of Marvel stuff I would read now if I were to pick something up. I'm enjoying this Absolute arc in DC. A couple of years ago now at this point, I read The Long Halloween, which is one of the more iconic Batman stories from about 30 years back. Loved that one so much I went and bought the deluxe hardcovers. Got those in my library now. There was a prequel and then the main one. I guess there's another one going on there. I've heard that the Last Ronin, which is a Ninja Turtles comic, is really good. So I'll probably check that one out. I think I follow... was it Jeremy Clark, who's the artist who's done a bunch of that stuff? And so with all of the artists that I've been following online, not necessarily knowing the stories, but seeing the art that they're drawing for them, it's like, yeah, 100%. I am here for that. I've been at this for longer than I gave myself credit for, but it's still kind of cool that I have a lot that I can learn, because that means there's a lot that I can discover, and there might be more things that I can enjoy. For now, I'll continue with the titles that I'm reading. The Energon Universe, the Transformers stuff. I want to go back and read more of that IDW stuff, see if there are any cool stories that I missed. And without a doubt, Ghost Machine is the favorite stuff that I'm reading right now. I want more Rook Exodus. 100% I want more Rook Exodus. And I'm really, really digging the Unnamed War. And Hornsby and Halo is really good. Not too worried about reading any of the other stuff, but it's fantastic. And I like comics more than I thought I did, just because I'm outside what most of the gang is reading. It's still a broad field, and there's something for everybody. Anyway, give me some recommendations if you got them. Till next time, drive safe. See you out there.